समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया.
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
अब समझा.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Geopolitics with Swasti with our consulting editor and foreign policy expert Swasti Rao. In this show, we take questions from our members on anything that's happening across the world, and Swasti tells us why. So we've got lots of questions this week, especially on Ukraine, Swasti. So I thought this would be a good place to start. So starting from the beginning, last week sort of ended with a big bang. We saw a very explosive meeting between President Trump and Zelenskyy. So Karthik Parashar asks, do you think that Zelenskyy made a mistake with Trump in that meeting?
Now, Karthik, whether Zelenskyy made a mistake with Trump at the Oval House, the answer is yes. Because, you know what mistake he made? He was trying to give a history lesson to Vance. He was trying to rectify Donald Trump on facts. And of course, the facts were on his side, but time isn't on his side. So if, you know, in the interest of time here, if I can say that he hadn't gone there to win the war of that narrative. He had gone there to sign on the minerals deal, which in my opinion, and I have written about it again and again, is the most Pareto optimal arrangement that, you know, Ukraine can have at this stage. Because even though it did not mention explicit security guarantees, and then the jury is still out on whether having American investment and American, you know, say technical, so to say, team on the ground would mean the same thing as having security guarantees or not. But what I'm saying is that at this stage, perhaps this is the best that Zelenskyy could have gotten from Donald Trump. And on the contrary, he got into a fight, a verbal, you know, so to say, an altercation, an argument, because they were not looking at facts. They wanted to win that war of narrative about Donald Trump being the deal maker and bringing the war to an end. And Zelenskyy should have known how to play it better. Now, very quickly, why he didn't do it? My reading is that, see, at a very fundamental level, Zelenskyy is not really a politician. If he were a politician, he really would not have stayed a country which was attacked outright by Moscow. When he was offered a right, when he was offered evacuation, he said that I'll stay, and he wanted ammunition to fight. It's been 3 years. There are a lot of studies on how many times he has actually gone to the battlefront. I'm not very sure if President Putin has actually dared to go to the battlefront, even though the narrative is that Ukraine is losing the war. So what I'm saying is that yes, you do have a very unusual leader. There's a reason why there's so many conspiracy theories against him about, you know, maybe he's a puppet, maybe he's taken wrong decisions. But frankly, I have myself met him 4 times at least, and I have not only met him but met a lot of Ukrainian people spread across the world, also a lot of East European people. Basically, when you're talking to people that have been at the receiving end of Russia's, you know, that politics of sphere of influence and Russia's playbook in that region, you kind of realize that our perspective about this entire thing sitting in India is really very lopsided, because we are used to looking at the war in Ukraine from the bilateral lens of India-Russia relations. And of course, there's a reason why we do that, but that lens by itself is not able to explain what is happening out there. So again, coming back to your question, did he make a mistake at the Oval Office? Yes, he did. Did he try to rectify it? Yes, he did that as well. But perhaps by then it's too late. And America has already done the unthinkable. America has stopped, you know, aid to Ukraine, even though he has not terminated. He has only paused that aid to Ukraine. But because the war at a critical juncture, not at the battlefront so much, because battlefront is quite static, and we will talk about that later. But this is, you know, to do with air defenses and how American weapons and American intelligence play a crucial role in protecting Ukrainian civilians and critical infrastructure, which is Ukraine's bigger vulnerability right now, because they don't really have those weapons. So yes, he has made a mistake in that sense, yes.
So sticking to the theme of Ukraine, at Aditya 1893 wants to know whether Ukraine can actually survive without US help.
Yeah, so that's a technical question, and let's understand it. Give me a couple of minutes to set the context right. there was a time when this was a war of choice,
Right.
and even though everybody can be a genius in hindsight and say this could have been done in a different way, etc., etc., but there was a time when this war was a war of choice, in the sense that perhaps Ukraine could have played around better with narrative setting. Perhaps he could have not used the term joining NATO and NATO membership in order to avert the most dangerous of all situations. But I think once the war started and once the Russian tanks rolled in, frankly, it became a war of compulsion. So I think you have to sort of understand that better. Nobody really, it's a country of 40 million people. Nobody really wants to jump into the well of death knowing that they cannot win this war. I think you have to understand that we need to contextualize it. And now when you say that can Ukraine stay? Now the short answer is that yes, it can. And there's a reason why. Because in the previous answer I was explaining that there is, when you look at the battlefront per se, the battlefront per se is pretty static. In fact, if you go back to the worldview that I recently had with three very distinguished military personnel, I mean, General Raj Chokla was of the opinion, and I actually asked him his views on the Russia-Ukraine war, and he said that, see, if you zoom out, you see that it's pretty much a stalemate, because nothing frankly is happening. In fact, as we are talking, yesterday Ukraine actually liberated a village called, or a town called Toriesk, okay? Now, even though, Russians are making some advancements somewhere, the Ukrainians are also making advancements. So that in a tactical sense or in a real, sense doesn't really mean anything. These little tactical advantages don't mean anything. Quickly to your question, Ukraine can hold for a while. Why? Because in the last 3 years, they have innovated their lack of manpower and lack of ammunition with drones. And I would say that their drone inventory right now is quite brimming. They can hold on to the battlefront.
Right.
But like I told you, that the vulnerability is not so much at the battlefront, because even though Russia is unable to launch a full-scale offensive, see, there is a reason why Russia is not able to eject the Ukrainians from Kursk, which is Russian territory. So right now, if there was to be a ceasefire, let's imagine the Ukrainians will remain in Kursk if Russia is going to remain here, and this is going to be an unacceptable situation for Putin. So long and short is that why I say that ceasefire is not possible right now is also because of the Kursk factor. I think right now Ukraine doesn't see any real reason to stop fighting on the battlefront, because there, if Russians are making tactical advantages, so are Ukrainians. The problem really is the critical infrastructure and the civilians, and that is where Ukraine doesn't have enough air defenses, and that was where Ukraine was so critically dependent on American intelligence, and which now America has withdrawn. And you can totally see that today itself, early morning, Russia launched a barrage for missile attacks. So those are things which in the long term really cannot help Ukraine. So in the long term, perhaps Europe has to step in. They have some time, but frankly, this is not really going to alter the outcome of the war, and this is not going to help Ukraine win back its territory or something. So there has to be a negotiation. The point is at what is that equilibrium?
I think this leads well into our next question, Swasti, also from Karthik Parashar, who points out that Europe is currently not in any real position to help Ukraine. So he also says the UK did decide to loan Ukraine $2.8 billion against Russian assets. So will A, what is Europe doing? And B, will Europe continue to trade with Russia after the war ends, or will they keep up sanctions?
Now, very quickly, what can Europe do? It's a good question. See, Europe has not been designed to function as a military, okay? For all the years after the Second World War, when the NATO guarantees came, Europe did not really design itself. In fact, America was pretty much an active player in that particular architecture that basically pushed Europe to not arm, because generations before had taught us that whenever Europe arms, they lead to a world war. So it was by design, it wasn't by default. But and Europe, of course, it kind of free rode on that security guarantees, etc. And Donald Trump does have a point when he says that why should I take care of your security? You should be doing that. But now things have come to a position where Emmanuel Macron actually said it from the high table that we will hope that America will be on our side, but even if America is not on our side, we will still go ahead and sort of stand up for our security. So what can Europe do? Very quickly, at the Europe-wide level, there are efforts happening at the Europe-wide level and at the member states level. Now, at the member states level, not all member states are on the same page, because not all member states have the same capabilities. So there is a certain rhetoric which is coming from Emmanuel Macron. He has given a sense of leadership, which is frankly quite rare. And if you ask me, I mean, it's quite admirable how he has kind of held everything together. And this is also coming at a time when domestically things are not working out well for him. So France taking lead, he has said that there would be planes in the air and troops on the ground. He doesn't rule that out. UK is pretty much on board. And there are other countries like Lithuania that are also on board. But then there is a kind of a variety out there. So Germany, with under Frederick Merz, who's now going to come, is very pro-Ukraine, has also said that transatlanticism is now dead. So he's also looking after security. But frankly, when it comes to sending troops on the ground, I would have my reservations. Giorgia Meloni, Italian leader, has said that even though she is not considering sending Italian troops to Ukraine, but today she said that she wants NATO's Article 5 to apply to Ukraine without a NATO membership. So what I'm saying is that at the individual member states level, there are these differences. And there are also leaders like Orban, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Fico in Slovakia that do not really buy this argument. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand is the EU-wide level, and this is something that you need to understand a little better. Ursula von der Leyen has actually announced that Europe is going to mobilize 800 billion euros over the next 4 years. Now, the question is how on earth is that going to happen? And that is where you need to understand. Out of those, 650 billion euros can be arranged quickly. You know why? Because European Union is going to remove the restrictions it constitutionally has on its member states for taking more debt for defense purposes. Because I told you that Europe was never conceived as a military machine, therefore they put a lot of restrictions on how much debt a member state can go for or can take for military purposes or for defense purposes. So they have removed those restrictions in order to push the member states to take more debt. So from that, the 27 member states can mobilize 650 billion euros. I mean, they can free up because the restrictions are removed. That's number one. So the way they are spending, that I have been, if you've been following my work, I've been saying that Europe has to change the way they spend. If they really want to change the way they act, they have to change the way they spend. That's the first 650 billion euros. The next 150 billion euros is actually coming from the EU incentives by which they are promoting, joint purchases, etc., etc. So that perhaps will come later. This is coming from the EU side, but the other side, the bigger chunk, is coming from the member states' debt. Okay, so that is what they're doing. The other thing that people in Europe are talking about is a combined, planes in the air, and for, again, defensive purposes, not offensive purposes, which means that there could be a situation where the Europeans can put together 100 planes in Ukrainian airspace trying to take down the incoming missiles to protect the Ukrainian population. Now, this does sound very incredible, but frankly, if you follow what is happening in Europe, I wouldn't be surprised that if they're pushed to a point where they actually do it. Whether it'll work or not is a different thing. I really would not be able to predict whether Europe will be able to walk the talk or not, because this is an unprecedented situation. Frankly, most of us predicted things incorrectly. I myself stand guilty of a lot of incorrect predictions. And the only thing I would say to conclude this particular topic is that we are living in a simulation, perhaps, so we have to wait and see whether this works. But if it works, this is going to be a radically different world order.
Actually, Swasti, I thought this would be a good place to round up our discussion on Ukraine. Anubhav Saxena wants to know about your personal stance, actually, on the Ukraine war. He's been reading your posts on X and thinks that you've taken the moral side of Ukraine. So, this is similar to what you were just talking about. He wants to know, what do you think is the practical solution of the Ukraine war? Russia is not really going to give back its territories. Can the EU enforce that? So he wants to know practical solution, not just a moral one.
Yeah, so I mean, morally, of course, when you are looking at a situation where a bigger neighbor has invaded a smaller neighbor, it certainly cannot be legitimized. I have been, studying international relations, I've been teaching international relations, and I frankly would never really give legitimacy to that action. Nobody has, not even the government of India has. But despite that, I understand your question, which is about the practical solution. So very quickly, I think in Ukraine there is a consensus around the fact that it is not possible to take back territory right now. So the territory that has gone perhaps is gone, at least for the time being, at least for the foreseeable future. But the 3 years of war have also, rendered Ukrainian military as Europe's second toughest military power after Russia. That is basically what is happening if you look at their military industrial complex. Today, Ukraine's defense requirements are actually met, 40% of that is met by the domestic defense industry. 30% of it comes from US and 30% of it comes from Europe. So I think what you perhaps need to understand here is that territory is not the question. The question is capitulation. And the question is accepting neutrality on Russia's terms. And that is where I see that even though territory is not coming back, I think when it comes to the question of neutrality or when it comes to the question of capitulation, I think that will not come so easily for all the reasons that I told you. Because if that was to happen, it would have happened by now. You know, all this while the conspiracy theory said that Zelenskyy is a CIA puppet, right? Now CIA is against him. By now, there should have been a coup, or Zelenskyy should have sensed that America is now against him, and he should have probably done a self coup, and he should have disappeared. You know, that's what we are used to looking at politicians who don't want to bear the brunt, who just want to keep their families safe and evacuate. That's what we've been seeing in all these conflict-ridden societies. But this man has chosen to stay. Now, whether that is coming from his strategic naivety or whether it's coming from bravery, I think that's a question that Ukrainians have to answer, not us.
So zooming out of Ukraine and looking more at the larger military-industrial complex and weapons technology specifically, @Ravi89 Rules ask, where is India with drone technology? Shouldn't the Indian private sector take the lead in at least drones? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, I mean, what the modern wars have taught us, in fact, even before Ukraine, there was another war that taught us that drones are here to stay. And this war is between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. And if you remember, Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, it were the Turkish Bayraktar drones that had completely given Azerbaijan a decisive victory over Armenia. And Ukraine war has simply reiterated that the future wars are going to be based on the drones. Now, very quickly, from India's perspective, there are basically three bodies that are looking at drone development. Don't buy the argument that India has done nothing on drones. India has been researching on drones for the last 10, 20 years actually. And the three major actors out there, of course, one is the DRDO, the other is HAL itself, and the third are the private private players. Now, very quickly, DRDO has been developing different kinds of drones. I mean, you can I could say that mainly 5 kind of drones are being developed by DRDO. You may have heard of Rustam and Tapas. You may have heard of Nishant. I don't know if you've heard of Lakshya. There's also something called Panchi, and there's also something called Swift. Now, of course, Rustam and Tapas have been inducted in a limited sense, but not really fully inducted. The reason being that the drones that we have developed indigenously have not been able to meet the ASQR, basically not able to meet the requirements of the armed forces, because there are majorly 4 dimensions that one looks at when you look at drones: range, reach, payload, and endurance. And what usually happens is that out of all these examples that I've told you, they have not really been able to meet them perfectly. So yes, DRDO develops these, and then of course there's HAL. HAL is also developing a drone. It's called the Cat's Warrior, the Loyal Wingman. And then there are also private players like Tatas, and there are there's a whole list of Adanis and all of that. Now, very quickly, yes, drones are here to stay. The Indian drone market is projected to grow from, say, about $600 million in 2024 to almost more than double in 5 years. Okay, and the Indian drone capacity is also going to grow from, say, about 10,000 drones right now to about 60,000 drones by the end of 5 years. So all of that is going to happen. But at the same time, do we need to up our game? Of course, we need to up our game, because right now, like I told you, that out of the 2 government bodies, I mean HAL and DRDO, they have not been able to make a drone which is fully inducted in the armed forces, and therefore we have a situation where we've been earlier dependent on the Israeli drones, and now we also bought very expensive drones from the US. And I think the situation can be helped but not completely substituted by the local defense industry. I think if we have to do it, the government also has to give this a big push, and the orders have to come. And frankly, I mean, there are 2 defense industrial corridors right now, and the government has to make certain very conscious decisions and conscious, so to say, G2G perhaps, communication to get more and more investors to invest in drones, because yes, drones are here to stay.
So @Kartik Parashar also asks, he mentions General McRyan talking about drones, artillery, and Starlink being the star performer of the Russia-Ukraine war. And he also says in the same interview, General Ryan talked about the death of attack helicopters. So it's a 2-part question here. how here is India getting 6 Apache and 156 Prashant helicopters. So how is India doing with these three? Shouldn't India develop expertise in specific equipments like radars, missiles, ejection seats, etc.?
Right. So I think the video that Karthik is referring to is the worldview that I did with Mick Ryan, which was on the 24th of February, where I asked him what are the star performers in the Russia-Ukraine war and what are the star losers. And I think this question is coming from there. So very quickly about Starlink. See, basically Starlink is what? Of course, you know that this is Elon Musk's. But it is a constellation of about 7,000 or 7,500 satellites in LEO. LEO is the lower Earth orbit. And if you look at the range, the orbital range of LEO is from about between 160 to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface is what we refer to as LEO. And what Elon Musk has done is that Elon Musk has put a lot of small, satellites in that space, and that is how it works so well. I mean, that's internet connectivity. It gives internet connectivity, and it's performing exceptionally well for the Ukrainians. That's how they are operating their drones, etc., etc. So this is basically what Starlink has done. Now, very quickly, in Ukraine right now, there are now fears about, just like Donald Trump has cut off aid or paused aid to Ukraine, Elon Musk also has been furiously tweeting all anti-Ukrainian, I would say, rhetoric. So there are genuine fears about what happens if Starlink were to withdraw their services. The French, company has, it's called Eutelstat, has already stepped in. But if you really compare the capabilities, it's, frankly, capabilities wise, it's 1/10 of what Starlink is. So if Starlink has about 7,000 satellites in the LEO, Eutelstat has only about 500 or 600. And even if they want to make it work well, the way Starlink is working now, they would require at least 2 months to do the groundwork. And they have gone on record saying that we would need at least 2 months to do it. So, and I think the only thing that has worked in their favor is that ever since the spat happened between Zelenskyy and Trump at the Oval Office, so the Eutelsat's shares, they really jumped up. Almost 6-7 times they jumped up. But in terms of really sort of stepping in, I think that's not really going to happen in 24 hours or 48 hours. So basically, this is where the situation for Ukraine is. Now, as far as India is concerned, very quickly about what is India doing. Now, in India, yes, there are potential, some alternatives that have been suggested, largely by two companies. One is Reliance Jio and one is Airtel. So Reliance Jio has already offered something like a GeoSatcom, and Airtel has given this OneWeb. These are the primary ones. There may be more, but these are the primary ones. And they have already given their suggestions to the government that we also want to put similar satellites in the LEO. And of course, scientifically speaking, this also creates another, discussion on actually how much can you really crowd the LEO, because it also leads to a lot of debris problems. Okay, so that's another thing that's beyond the scope of the discussion that we are having right now. But yes, India is doing it, and this is for the commercial things. And for our military purposes, we have something called Gagan and we have something called Navik. Now, Gagan, of course, is actually short for GPS-aided geo-augmented navigation, and Navik is navigation with Indian constellations. Now, these are both, India's own navigation systems, and we are trying to develop that. India doesn't really require a global coverage. India wants regional coverage, and that is why India is trying to sort of, develop our own things. If you want to compare it with Starlink, I would say it would not be really a fair comparison to make, because like I said, that this is looking more at a regional level and versus Starlink is looking more at a global level. But it's wrong to say that India is not doing anything. So there are a lot of things that India is doing.
And the second bit about the helicopters. Shouldn't India develop expertise in specific equipments as well when it comes to radars, missiles, ejection seats? Karthik Parashar points out that instead of making everything on its own, shouldn't India develop specific expertise?
Now, I think there are a lot of things that you've asked, so for you it's very easy because you simply put a comma, right? Starlink, artillery, radars, missiles, and for me it becomes like a couple of pages worth of explanation. So very quickly, let's talk about attack helicopters. So one of the things that General Mick Ryan said in that particular worldview was that one of the key takeaways from Russia-Ukraine war is that attack helicopters have not worked well. And I think what you're asking is that if the attack helicopters have not worked very well, then why are we buying the Apaches or why are we buying the Prachand helicopters, which are attack helicopters? Because on the one hand, a key takeaway is drones, and on the other hand, the key takeaway ways that attack helicopters don't work. Now, it's a good question, but it requires a bit of, again, context setting. See, attack helicopters by themselves, I mean, they're just a weapon, okay? Their success or failure is going to be decided by how they are deployed. So what is the deployment philosophy? And I will just tell you very quickly what has happened. See, first of all, you have to understand that there's a difference between attack helicopters and armed helicopters. A regular helicopter can be deployed with some weapon and you can call it armed. But an attack helicopter is designed as an attack helicopter. In fact, if you look at the cockpit of the attack helicopter from the inside, whether you look at an Apache or a Prachanda, so it actually looks like a fighter cockpit, you know. So it's like loaded with weapons, not many people to sit. So it's at a design stage, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is that, you see, from the Indian perspective, what is happening is that the Indian army requires these attack helicopters because attack helicopters can fly low and fly slow.
Right.
Okay, so they are very good for anti-armor. So if you want to take out your enemies, you want to take out their armor, etc. So attack helicopters are a better deal compared to fighters that are flying at 800 km per hour. You know, that's one, and they're flying very high. So fighters, basically, you have to understand what is the purpose. Okay, why are they deployed? And because you want to give cover to your troops on the ground, you need something which flies low and slow, and attack helicopter, and with a lot of weapons, and that is why attack helicopters are significant. Why they did not work out in the Russia-Ukraine war was because they became vulnerable to the man-pads, to the shoulder-held weapons like javelins and stingers, because they were not very effective against that. And yes, it is true that in the last 3 years, Ukraine has taken more than hundreds of attack helicopters, and that is perhaps the key takeaway that you're talking about. Now, just sort of circling back to the Indian experience, why India has placed an order of the Apaches and Prachandas is that it is not just about, for example, what I just told you, that army needs that cover, of something like anti-armor, etc. It's also because in the Indian context, they are very useful for counterinsurgency operations. So the CI operations, they're very useful because if you get some intelligence about, say, a terrorist hiding somewhere, I mean, your troops could probably take more than 24 hours to get there, but an attack helicopter can do that within a matter of hours. So I think it's also got to do with, like, for example, what you have to keep in mind is that what are your requirements? Second, what is the deployment philosophy? And are you in a full-scale war? Yes, unless they are deployed in huge numbers, right? They will not be effective, and that's what we learned. And very quickly, the last thing is that as we are progressing and learning from how military strategy is evolving, in due course, this particular task that I was telling you, that they can fly low and they can fly slow and they can carry weapons, all of this is going to be done by drones. So it is true that in due course, all these tasks can be better tackled or can be better carried out by drones, and that's where the future is. But are we there right now? For our own requirements, I think that is the reason behind why India has bought it. But the future is going to look very different from that because all of those things are going to be carried out by drones. That's what the Russia-Ukraine war has taught us.
That's on drones, Swasti. What about missiles and then radars?
Okay, all right. So yes, India does make its own missiles. In fact, India has multiple programs. If you ask me to actually start listing how many missiles we make, it will be rather difficult, but I'll try to give you like a broad classification. Now, yes, you need to know that there's something called the IGMDP, or the Integrated Guided Missile Development Program, which was launched in 1983 under Kalam Saab, and this was for self-sufficiency in missile technology. Now, based on this particular program, the IGMDP, we have majorly 5 kinds of missiles, right? I'm sure you have heard those names earlier, but I'll just help you classify them better. So, for example, Prithvi, Agni, Trishul, Akash and Nag. And now there's a bit of a difference out here. Now, Prithvi is basically Prithvi, Agni and Trishul are SSMs, which is surface-to-surface missiles. Then there's Akash. Akash is a surface-to-air missile. And then there's Nag. Nag is basically an ATGM or an anti-tank guided missile. And Nags, except for Nags, the rest have been inducted. Of course, they're successful. Nag has not really been able to clear all the tests. So it is still in the process of being, I would say, tested. So we are there. Apart from these 5, you also have the Astra missiles. I'm sure I have done a lot of work on how we are now deploying the Astra missiles on the Rafale Marines that we are buying from France, or the Astra missiles have also been deployed on the Sukhoi,
From
30s.
Russia,
Yeah,
yeah.
from no, I mean we make them under
Yeah,
licensed production.
yeah,
So the
yeah.
knockdown kits come from Russia. We assemble at HAL.
Got it.
Okay, there is some
Yeah, fair
indigenized
enough,
content
yeah.
there. Now Astra has also been a success story. They are different from the ones I just told you about. Astra come in 3 versions: Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3. Now, Mark 1 has already been deployed, like I said, on Sukhoi 30s and on the Rafale Marines. And as far as Mark 2 is concerned, they have also been put sometimes. And Mark 3 is something which is being tested. But like Astra is also work in progress. So the Mark 2 and Mark 3 are a work in progress. We will keep developing, better technology. Mark 3, just for, a bit of, your understanding, has a completely different technology, which is called the SFDR technology. It's a solid fuel ducted ramjet technology. So it kind of really increases its range. So this is what we have. This is the second category. The third category is about Rudram, and Rudrams are anti-radiation missiles. So that's a completely different thing, and they have a huge range, the 300-kilometer of range, and they can be used against radars. So there are also Rudram. There is a bit of a variation. There's Rudram 1, Rudram 2, etc. And these are also being tested on the Sukhoi 30s, etc. As far as induction is concerned, I'm not very sure if the Air Force has gone public with when and on how many weapons are we planning to deploy. So please understand that we are talking about extremely sensitive information. So I can only share what is there in the public domain. Then there are also hypersonic missiles that DRDO is now developing. Dhanush is a missile that we are developing. Then I'm sure you have heard about the cruise missiles like Pralay, like Nirbhay, and of course BrahMos. So when it comes to missiles, don't be under the impression that India has not done good work. I think India has done stellar work when it comes to missiles, and I think we will continue with that.
Radars is the third and last thing, I promise, Swasti, that I want to ask you about.
Well, I mean, as far as radars are concerned, yes, again, a work in progress. And again, India has been trying to deploy indigenously, different types of radars. I can quickly tell you about 3-4 types. So what you have to understand is that DRDO has actually set up like a specialized agency to look at radars, which is called Electronics and Radar Development Establishment, or the LRDE. And LRDE was actually set up by DRDO, like I said, because it wanted to address the armed forces needs in the field of radars, in the field of communication systems, etc. So it was born out of that technical requirement. So under this initiative, right, you may have heard of the AESA, the ASA or the ISA radar, which is short for Active Electronically Scanned Array. This is one type of radar that we are developing. It's developed by DRDO, the LRDE, of course. The second is Uttam, and Uttam has also been, developed, I think, for a long time now. It's a solid-state gallium arsenide-based ISA radar. Okay. And this is also developed by our LRDE. Then there is something called Virupaksha radar, and then there are different kinds of radars. Apart from this, there's something called the Swati radars. There's Revati radars, and by the way, Swatis are the radars that we have actually sold to Armenia. Okay. So there are different kinds of radars. Again, just to cut a long story short, it is a misnomer to think that India has not really been working on these. I think indigenously we have a lot of talent to put things together, and whether it's missiles I just told you about or drones, not everything will have the same success rate. Yes, you have to be very realistic here, but I think to be dismissive is not right. Okay, to be overtly optimistic and to be completely dismissive, ke beech mein there is something called being very, very realistic. I think that's what we require. And yes, with more and more private players into the system, we can definitely make it more competitive. And just the last thing is perhaps before she reminds me, I remember about the ejection seats. Yeah. So as far as ejection seats are concerned, yeah, I mean, we tried to develop our own. It didn't work very well. So for the Russian jets, the ejection seats come from Russia. Then we are also getting from the Western, partners. So frankly, we have not had the same success for the ejection seats, but it's okay, it's okay, right? I mean, there's a lot to be proud of, and where we have not done enough. There's always room for improvement, and that's precisely what we're doing.
And just to bring all of this together on artillery, is there something that you...
Yeah. So I think, you see, artillery, of course, we have identified what our gaps are, and we have tried to, give a balance between importing and also developing our own. But frankly, if you want to understand the question of artillery better, I really, really recommend that you watch this worldview that I did with Brigadier Anshuman Narang. He is from the artillery, and in fact, I call that worldview an arty party. You will get every single information that you want. The link is there in the
We'll put
description
it down.
box. So you please take a look about where have been our struggles, what have been our wars, what have been our requirements, and frankly, it's one of my most favorite worldviews so far. So I do recommend, please watch
Yeah,
it.
please watch it. Now zooming back out to the other major geopolitical story this week, which is on Trump and tariffs. So we have a question from Ad Bharat, that is India, who asks, earlier I thought that India had some advantages and some disadvantages from both Biden and Trump. It didn't matter who was the US president when it came to India. Now, after Trump's 2nd April deadline for tariffs and all other additional things which are happening in the White House, what is the impact going to be on India?
Well, I mean, in the short term, I would say that America is not a dependable partner. And this is where I think that I have had to contradict myself, because I have always been of the opinion that India must be very strategic, very pragmatic. India should come out, just like Dr. Jaishankar keeps saying, out of this very irrational anti-Westernism we have. But like I said, that whatever Donald Trump has done so far, he has been the chief disruptor
Yeah,
of the
it's
world
not
order.
inspiring any
See,
confidence.
it's not about supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine. The way he's taken on, right, his allies, his adversaries, the way he's taken on countries like India. I mean, look at us. We did early on, if you remember, in February, we presented our budget. In that budget itself, our finance minister stood up right in front of the parliament and said that we have already lowered tariffs on select items. We have already decided to buy more hydrocarbons. Okay, we have already decided to also loosen up a lot of restrictions on our civil nuclear, scenario, just in order to attract more investment from these countries, because we have a civil nuclear deal and nothing much has happened. And then very early on, we did an early visit to the White House, and where we made it very clear that we will buy. Of course, that we know that for Trump, the tariff lens is the only lens that he's looking at a lot of things with, and the other lens is the deal making lens. Okay, so the tariff lens and the deal making lens. Okay, so looking at the tariff lens, we said that yes, we have a massive trade with the US. US is a very important partner. Yes, we have about 40 to 45 billion worth of trade surplus with the US. And the ways we are trying to reduce it is by buying more hydrocarbons from you and buying more military equipment from you. And all those things are there in the joint statement. And this comes over and above the fact that we agreed to lower the tariffs already. Now, after all this, if Donald Trump chooses to publicly berate India yet again and say that from the 2nd of April, we are going to do this, obviously this is not the way you speak to partners. We are no allies of the US, but we surely have a place under the sun. So this, frankly, so tariffs are going to come. We will see what happens. These are going to be reciprocal. There is always a way of the middle ground. But I think on a more practical level, what is happening is that has also, somewhere made India double down on tackling its other FTAs, which were being long negotiated. So if you remember that only last week Ursula von der Leyen from the EU Commission was here, you know that India is negotiating a long-standing, FTA and a bilateral investment treaty with the EU. And the two sides have said that they will perhaps try to find some kind of a middle ground to try and negotiate and finalize it by the end of 2025. In its current form, there are a lot of technical hurdles, but they will try to do something. Why? Because India does enjoy a trade surplus there. It is a very important trading relationship, and because what is Mr. Donald Trump is doing, we should really try and get our act together. So that's the first thing. Right now, as we record this particular, geopolitics with Swasti, our external affairs minister in the UK. Why is he gone to UK? My column is also on that. He has gone to actually try and conclude the FTA, which we are again negotiating with the UK. Our combined trade in goods and services is already about $50 to $52 billion, and we would like to sort of, double down on that. Again, that's a trading relationship which is in our trade surplus. And just to give you another trade surplus, yeah. So very quickly, what we are doing is that we are sort of somewhere becoming more realistic, trying not to put all our eggs in the American basket, because under Donald Trump, one really doesn't know. And Donald Trump is perhaps going to carry on with all this disruption till the time the American markets give him a reality check. And I think the American stocks have not been performing well because this kind of speculation nobody can really handle. So I think a lot of his rhetoric is also directed at his own MAGA fan base, and they are also preparing for governor's elections. And frankly, one has to see after 2 years if Donald Trump can carry on with this kind of an attitude, because right now he has majority in both houses, right? And but after 2 years things could change radically. So let's see how far is he going to do it. But the damage to American credibility
It's done.
and the damage to American posture in the world is quite I would say palpable.
We have another, keep sticking on this churn in geopolitics because of Trump. We have another question from Ashish Singh, who asks, what kind of bearing will this attitude have on security of Taiwan? So he asked, do you think China will try to exploit this window provided by Trump's isolationism? Do you think China is going to take advantage and annex Taiwan?
As far as Taiwan is concerned, Taiwan has shown the intelligence that Zelenskyy has not shown. So, why I say this? Not to sort of have this moral high ground over these, heads of the state, but as an analyst, as somebody who observes. See, Taiwan knows that the only real leverage it has on the US is through the semiconductors and chips. And when Biden administration called for this Inflation Reduction Act and called for this CHIPS Act, I think he proposed it in 2022. It was also passed in 2022. So basically they wanted to reduce their vulnerability on Taiwan, and they wanted to bring the semiconductor supply and production chains back home
to the US.
So what Taiwan did, of course, there was some alarm in Taiwan that, okay, maybe in case of an attack, then US will not have the incentive to save us. But even then, Taiwan was very, I would say, intelligent and quick in assessing what is it that Trump requires from them, and they started heavily investing in the US. Okay, so Taiwan has been very forthcoming in heavily investing in the US, keeping Donald Trump appeased, so that the leverage that they think they have over US continues. But going by how Donald Trump has been the chief disruptor of the global order, is that enough? I would now argue no. Is the Article 5 of NATO enough? No. There are no guarantees anymore. So Taiwan should also wake up and smell coffee. I'm sure they have done. I think they should be doubling down on their own military readiness, because if there's anything that they can learn from Ukraine, is that please do not take anything for granted, not under Donald Trump.
On that note, Swasti, thanks so much for joining us this week and talking to us about Trump and how to expect, how the only thing we can predict is unpredictability. Please do join us next week where we'll be answering more questions like this.
But I still have an appeal to make, which is that I and Vandana were talking, that why is it that it's only the men of the world that are asking us questions? Where are the women in geopolitics? The two are here, but of course, but then we would like more women to ask us questions. This is nothing against the men. So we just realized that it's International Women's Day, and we should make an appeal for more women to be interested in geopolitics.
Yeah, come join us. Ask us questions. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing you next week.